Hi, I'm Paul Barclay from ABC Radio National here in Brisbane. Great to have you all here at one of the early sessions, one of the first sessions of the Ideas Festival, the 10th Ideas Festival it is, and the 10th year of the Ideas Festival in any case. Crowdsourcing, how to engage those on the edge with Tom Hulme is what we're here for today. I should also mention, if you can turn your mobiles off, was that appropriate during a crowdsourcing gig? Maybe turn them on silent, perhaps instead. You might want to tweet while you're at it. I'm sure that most of you here know about the concept of crowdsourcing using social networking and the web. I won't elaborate on it. I'm sure Tom will be talking about it in his presentation in depth. Suffice to say, it's all about using the wisdom and ideas of the crowd, of everyone really, to innovate, to develop new ways of thinking, new ways of doing business. Crowdsourcing is to innovation what blogs and citizen journalism is to the news media. It's changing the face of how we think about innovation. At the end of this presentation, we should have plenty of time for questions, well, a bit of time anyway, so please, when I come to questions, put your hand up or comments, be brief, and we'll get through as many as we can. It's a good opportunity to talk to Tom about some of his ideas. Let me introduce you to Tom Hulme. He is at the moment working on creating a global tool to help solve problems. Sounds impressive. It's called Open IDEO, and Open IDEO just beat Twitter in the Webbies, which is sort of like, you know, the Oscars for online stuff. He's design director at IDEO in London, a serial entrepreneur, I should say, maybe a social entrepreneur as well. He invests in good causes, helped to build a range of successful enterprises, and he understands how business works. He's interested in commercialising innovation, works with clients in retail, technology, financial services, fashion and hospitality. He even taught at a secondary school in Tanzania. What more do you want? He's just been named in Wired magazine's top 100 power brokers. Without any further ado, Tom Hulme.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really excited to share some thoughts on crowdsourcing, and to that effect, through the course of this talk, please do share questions, etc. We may come back to them, and if you use my hashtag, you can see here, @THulme, I'll be able to track down the questions and hopefully answer them. So through the course of this talk, I'm really excited to share some thoughts on what crowdsourcing is. I'll also share some thoughts on how it's actually changing over time, because it's changing radically at the moment, and generally, I think, for the positive. And finally, I'd love to share some learnings that we've had from launching Open IDEO. We're up to just under 16,000 users. We're still very much in beta. We're learning all the time. I can't imagine we'll ever take the beta sticker off the site. But we've had some early learnings. We've made some mistakes, and I'd love to share some thoughts on that. So let's dive first into crowdsourcing and what it is. Now, I've got to confess, even though this talk's title was crowdsourcing, I hate the term. So it kind of rose to prominence in 2006. A guy called Jeff Howe wrote an article for Wired magazine, and it's kind of been adopted by everybody. It's an all-encompassing bucket of ideas, and generally it's starting to be felt to be slightly negative because it feels really transactional. It feels like you're just taking from people and giving nothing back. And so to me, and hopefully through the course of this talk, you'll see that actually I think it's just the first incarnation of something far, far more exciting that's going on. So if we think about why crowdsourcing to date has the traction it does, it's nothing new. You know, through human history, well, since certainly the Industrial Revolution in, let's say, the 17th century, we've started building really efficient structures. We're building structures that are all about just command and control. They're about controlling what you produce. And by definition, it's expensive to run them. So it was only a matter of time before people realized that it might make sense to take stuff from outside that sort of pyramidal hierarchy. And there's examples of this that range all the way back. I mean, one that I'm inspired by is the Longitude Prize. So in 1714, the British government, struggling to keep hold of their ships, they kept running into islands, probably including some close to here. They thought we need to know better where we are, and that was exceptionally valuable to them. So they ran a crowdsourcing competition. They ran a competition to award £20,000 at the time, which is huge amounts of money, as you can imagine, for the person that actually enabled them to pinpoint the longitude of their ship within 20 nautical miles. And this guy, who commemorative plaque you can see here, John Harrison, he won that prize. And the thing they did that was smart is they actually incentivized people just to make little baby steps of progress. So crowdsourcing is not new. It may suddenly be fashionable. We may all be hearing about it, talking about it, hating it, loving it. It's not new. It's been around for ages. And you've got some good examples of it in Australia. So one I find really inspiring is 99 Designs. It's an Australian company. They've moved their head office now, I think, to the West Coast on the States. But they've completed about 45,000 projects, usually around brand, usually around communication design. But they're paying, on average, designers over sort of, $600,000 a month in prize money. So it's effective, it has traction. And I think it will continue to have traction because actually it's obvious the gap it fills. It enables you to grow your workforce with aligned incentives. You reward people when it works. So this stuff is pretty obvious to us, like the idea that prizes enable you to gather new intellectual property. And actually, we're starting, if you believe some advocates and proponents of it, you'd think that these types of prize-based systems are absolutely the answer. Put simply, they work because you get a collection of people, they contribute ideas, someone moderates it in a closed way so the intellectual property stays safe, so you can use it, and then it gets ranked and the prizes are awarded. So this is like the most obvious interpretation of crowdsourcing, and it's been pretty successful. The closest to the Longitude Prize, I think, that we've had in recent history is the Netflix prize. In 2006, Netflix announced that if they could find people that would improve their algorithm for actually recommending which video you'd like, by just 10%, they give you $1 million. And actually, it was won with 20 minutes to spare in 2009. And it had been won by combining heaps of people's different ideas together, even things around your emotion and how your memory works on different days. So this stuff will continue. So I could stop this talk here and say, great, prizes are the answer. We can all stop worrying about alternatives. Let's just run heaps of prizes. But I think that's kind of the early version. It's 1.0 of crowdsourcing. There's much more interesting stuff coming. So to highlight that point, I'd love to show you a video, well, it's actually an advert from 1997 for Microsoft in Carter. So I think you should remember it was certainly for sale as a CD here. Sorry, we'll get some audio.
New collages and over 5,000 links embedded to websites. When you're hungry for information, who you gonna call?
Microsoft Encarta 97 Encyclopedia Deluxe. Hold the fries.
Okay, hold the fries. So this guy thought he had the solution. He's looking pretty smug about it. Microsoft thought they had the solution. They bought materials, intellectual property from encyclopedias. They were convinced they had it sussed. They were convinced that no one else would offer a better encyclopedia out there. But we all know that something different came on the scene. And actually, something else came on the scene that contributed to them closing Encarta in 2009, and that was Wikipedia. So last year, Wikipedia had its 10 billionth edit. 10 billion edits by people that basically were not remunerated in this traditional approach. There's no prize-based system in Wikipedia. This is the stuff that gets me really excited. It's open systems. It's network collaboration rather than traditional prize-based closed systems. And they look distinctly different to the prize-based systems. There's clever design in there. There's a huge community you can tap into. People move in and out of the community. We'll talk about the incentives to participate a little later. But you can see it's completely different. The systems basically have to run where ideas run. They sort of revolve around this system. They're thrown out by people if they don't like them. It's a self-moderated system. It feels and looks completely different to the hierarchy we saw before. It no longer is that sort of triangle, the pyramidal structure. It's more like a network. And networks are interesting. When you're designing systems, networks are more interesting than pyramids because they enable kind of Darwinistic emergent stuff to grow. They enable nodes to fall away, nodes to regrow. And that stuff is completely different. It's a different approach. Less Newtonian, sort of dictatorial efficiency, and more adaptability, emergence, Darwinistic thinking. So that kind of leads you to the question, look, is Wikipedia just a complete freak? 150,000 English-speaking editors. Is it just a one-off, or is this an unstoppable trend? And probably the best way to answer that question, one of the places we turn to when thinking about it, you know, the gentleman that invented the most famous triangular framework in human history on humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow. He created the hierarchy of needs, which, whether we like it or not, we all subscribe to. This is the stuff that gets us going. And there's been awful examples where we've had to focus at the bottom of the pyramid again, around safety and physiological security. But actually, the fact that we're all sat in this room is testament to the fact that you guys are shooting up the pyramid. You're on your way up. And if you look at those needs, what keeps us all happy, sense of belonging, sense of esteem, self-actualization, the question is, are we finding new ways to actually meet those? Now, if we were sat in this room 30 years ago, we probably would have said the way to get your sense of esteem, your sense of belonging, was the American dream. It's like 2.4 kids, 2.4 homes, 2.4 cars, whatever. It's materialism. But it's radically changed recently. The global financial crisis, which you guys I learned this week called GFC, which it took me ages to figure out what you were talking about, but I now understand, and it's a big issue. So that's changed, I think, the way that we actually seek belonging and esteem and self-actualization. You guys have had experiences towards the tail end of this year that are incredibly difficult for certainly me to understand how complex and painful the process was. But if I look at the sort of web-based communities that are growing around topics like this, you can see it's triggered changes. So the question is, how's all of this stuff changing what Maslow knew that we all wanted to achieve? And I think it's changing all three. So, you know, belonging is kind of an interesting one, or esteem. There's examples all around Australian society at the moment that show us that you guys are changing an interpretation of belonging and esteem. This is a startup, actually. It started in Bondi, it started over down in Sydney. It's got 40 car brands now, and basically you can rent out your own car to people for the day. So it's more about access than ownership. That's a big change in that pyramid. We no longer need to own everything. Another interpretation of that I think is doing incredibly is the garage sale. Again, this one started in Bondi in Sydney. And there's 1,613 sales up there where people are literally just selling stuff they don't really need. In London, we've got this explosion of storage companies. They're everywhere. I mean, what a wonderful way of showing people that they've got too much more than they need. That materialism is kind of shifting. So it's more about access. We understand that. And we're finding new ways to signal belonging. This is an interesting way of signaling belonging. As of last week, 20 million people had favorited Barack Obama's Facebook page. That's 3% of the users of Facebook. It's unbelievable. People are using it as a way of showing what they belong to. It's kind of an emergent tribalism. It's a different way of showing. So you guys are, you can see this. 100,000 people have liked Julia Gillard's page. It's clear. I don't know what that means. That's 1%, by the way, of Australia's 10 million Facebook users rather than 3% of the world's, which is interesting in itself. That's probably an important statistic if you're a politician. I think pretty hard about what that means. That being said, there are causes that are motivating huge numbers of Australians. So 2% of Australia's 22 million people have actually participated in Get Up, which you guys know more about than me, but seems a wonderful campaign for actually churning into action. It's a way of demonstrating new esteem, new belonging, and potentially self-actualization. So I was trying to think through a way of showing how this desire to learn or participate is changing. And Google Trends, for you guys, is a really fun tool to do it. So every time you put a search thread into Google, you make Google smarter. You make it cleverer. You're doing all the work for them. They just need to run the numbers and predict. And if you do Google Trends on 2 searches in Australia, so this is just search of Australia, I thought the internet, people often search for discounts. And people often also search for how to do stuff. And if you look at that change, I think it symbolizes this inflection we're seeing of how people are finding new ways to self-actualize. So this blue flat line you see is discounts. It's people searching for discounts. It's practically unchanged. Look at the green line, which is people searching how to do stuff on the internet. It's hugely changing. This is us finding new ways to actually meet Maslow's needs. An example which inspires me, not expires me, that would be hideous, inspires me is a lady called Lauren Luke. She's a 27-year-old single mum up north in the UK. She was passionate about makeup and she started putting how-to videos online. To date, she's had 108 million views. 108 million views. She's actually in partnership with her own makeup line. She self-actualized and it became incredibly valuable. I love this. What you can't see here is within a day of the wedding, Kate Middleton Royal Wedding Day makeup look. I'm assuming that's Kate's makeup she's showing, but the number of views speaks for itself, 20,000 within 40 hours. She's so fast to react, and people love her because she's honest. So another way of actually looking at Maslow's hierarchy or thinking about these needs, and I'm happy to send any of you this framework. It's a framework by a guy called Karim Lakhani at Harvard Business School. And he'd kind of plotted out all of the needs against extrinsic motivations, money. I think crowdsourcing usually operates here. That's why I'm less excited about it, because there's all of this other space that probably creates more sort of drive towards Maslow's needs. So I'm excited about that stuff. And I think we see it everywhere. Just as a sort of separate but I think important example, Khalid Saeed is 28-year-old. He was allegedly murdered by police in June of 2010. It didn't make any noise. A really amazing guy called Wael Koneem, who actually worked at Google, set up a Facebook page. It had 500,000 likes, and it basically triggered the Day of Rage on January 25th at Tahrir Square in Egypt. It triggered the start of a revolution. I think actually he does a better job of explaining why this is different and why this meets this new participation economy that I was talking about before. So I'll let you listen to him explain it.
We announced on the page the locations, they shut down Facebook. But I had a backup plan. I used Google Groups to send a mass mail campaign to all these people in order to tell them here are the locations and please spread it among your friends. And everyone knew eventually. So definitely technology played a great role here. You know, it helped keeping people informed. It helped making us, all of us collaborate. I call this Revolution 2.0. Revolution 2.0 is I say that our revolution is like Wikipedia. Okay? Everyone is contributing content. You don't know the names of the people contributing the content. This is exactly what happened. Revolution 2.0 in Egypt was exactly the same. Everyone was contributing small pieces, bits and pieces. We drew this whole picture. We drew this whole picture of a revolution. And that picture, no one is the hero in that picture.
So when he talks about drawing the picture, he talks about creating the playing field with technology that enables these emergent behaviors. If you look at the January 25th or the uprising on Twitter, the noise, you see this is acutely true. Whereas in the past, you would have had this pyramidal shape. For some reason, the red's not projecting well, but the ones that look black are actually Egyptian language. The ones here that are in blue, you can see here would be English language. So you can see him, and he's probably recognized as one of the most influential characters here. He didn't own the influence in any way. So it's exactly what we're talking about. It reminds us completely of this sort of network-based approach. It reminds us completely that actually the pyramid that was in power has transitioned, and this Darwinistic view has replaced it. So my view, and that's kind of the first half of what I'd love to share with you, is that this participation, more than just doing it for cash, more than doing it just for the obvious extrinsic motivators, is here to stay. And it's going to grow, if anything. So then the question for me at IDEO, and the question for all of us at IDEO, was actually, what does it mean? What does this mean for IDEO? So we're a global innovation company, and we help our clients grow. We help them grow through creating new brands, services, business models, products, interaction design, websites. The stuff's as important as it's ever been. But this participation had the opportunity potentially to make it better. It's disruptive, but it could potentially make IDEO's offer better. If you look at the stuff that IDEO really believes in, the first thing is we believe passionately in diversity. I never work in a team at IDEO with people with the same skill set as me. Thank goodness it'd be boring. It's eclectic. The teams are eclectic. We also believe passionately in going to extremes. So if I'm interested in what's happening in a sort of market around credit, I don't just fixate on the people, your average customer today, because I know that they're not the customer of the future. It's the guys at the extremes that migrate across. They become the mass market. So we look to them. And the final thing that we do is we passionately believe in designing systems. The days of being able to just differentiate around form of an object are long gone. It gets copied. People fall into the trap of saying Apple's a success because their laptops are beautiful. They are. But their service, their brand, their retail, the fact they opened up developer tools to developers, they were beautiful as well. It created a system. So we design systems for our clients. And when you take all of those three things together, it was our belief actually that harnessing the wisdom of crowds, or what we would prefer to say, collaborating with crowds, would offer huge value to IDEO. And we did what we always do. We kind of build stuff to be able to think it through, and we prototyped. So in this case, we prototyped OpenIDEO by creating a Facebook page called Big Conversations, just to see whether people would be interested in talking with us. Historically, brands are a monologue. They just talk to their consumers, their clients. We wanted to see whether we had permission to have a dialogue. And we learnt we did. So we started designing OpenIDEO. So one of the ladies that designed it with me is here. Hi, Anne. She's here today. We've had fun this week working through a sort of physical version of OpenIDEO. I'll talk a little more about that at the end. But I'd love just to share with you what we've created and actually why I hope it fits with IDEO's brand. Because there's no perfect website to anything. You can only have the best possible solution for your community. So when you guys are collaborating, your solution needs to look very different to IDEO's, which needs to look different to my personal one. It's all different. It's based on the community. So hopefully, when you think about what's precious to IDEO, you'll see why we designed OpenIDEO as we have. It's an introduction.
For a while now, IDEO designers have been keen to put the best bits of the creative process online and invite everyone to join in. OpenIDEO is a global community that will draw on your optimism, inspiration, ideas and opinions to solve problems together for the collective social good. Each challenge starts with a big question, something to get all of us thinking. Next comes the inspiration phase, in which we all post inspiring things that we've seen out there that might help us solve the big question. The more visual the posts, the better. Images, videos and stories will all help to get everyone going. After inspiring one another, it's time to flex our creative muscles in the concepting phase. How would you solve this problem? Post your solution and show everyone how you plan to make it a reality. If someone else's idea sparks something for you, you can build on it. OpenIDEO was designed with this way of working in mind. This is where you get to collaborate with other people and where the magic really happens. Once concepts are fully formed, they're put through the evaluation phase. This process is exactly as it sounds. You rate and comment on the concepts that you believe will best solve the problem, according to the given criteria. The concepts that rise to the top in the evaluation phase win, with the winning idea being available for development by the challenge sponsor. Your participation in each phase, plus how much you've collaborated with others, all add up to your design quotient, or DQ for short, which you can choose to publicise or keep private. It offers you feedback and recognition. And because we're all good at different parts of the creative process, we'll all have slightly different DQs. Just like in all good brainstorming sessions, we're going for quantity as well as quality. The more you add, collaborate, and critique in any phase, the bigger DQ you'll rack up. The DQ will become a badge of honour for community members over time. In a nutshell, we've created an open online tool that takes you through the creative process. It's highly visual, collaborative, generates feedback, and most importantly, it's fun to use. OpenIDEO offers its community inspiration and recognition. The site will be as good as its input, and we're looking forward to seeing what it becomes. OpenIDEO, an open platform for innovation where we create better together.
Cool. Apologies for the colours. I think Hyan and I are sort of dying inside when we see how they got slightly adapted there. But I'm happy to share the video. It's on the site. I think it's self-explanatory. So I thought what we could perhaps close out with, I've kind of included everything in the participation economy. And so I thought I'd maybe take you through the train of questions that I ask people when they're interested in operating this space. And I do it fairly systematically because we really know never to start with, for example, technology. So let's whiz through the 10 questions I ask every client if they're interested in open innovation or collaboration. And I'll tweet out the final slide, which will actually be all of these listed out in case they inspire any of your own thinking. And actually, part of what I'll do is I'll reference the challenge we've just run with the Queensland Government and then the Ideas Festival, which hopefully some of you guys participated in. It was actually, I think it's a wonderful example. We got engagement around this challenge that we kind of haven't seen before. So we had 617 concepts submitted over the last 8 weeks, and the quality has been unbelievably good. We've just spent 2 days in a workshop sort of helping flesh them out before they go up onto the site for sort of continued collaboration, and we were absolutely inspired by the quality. So let's go through what we've learned and the 10 questions, and then let's have some questions and answers. So the first thing that we've learned is you have to take unbelievable care with the question that you ask your community. If you haven't got a good idea of what you want to learn, don't even start, because all you'll get back is noise. The only certainty is if you ask a bad question, you're going to get a bad answer. If you actually decide to design whole systems, you have to allow more time. So understand what touch points you want designed, if it is design you're doing. Understand what the playing field is to help people understand that. So when we set a question, we know, we've learned it's got to be inspiring, it's got to be short, and it's got to be a real sort of call to action. But the question is not static. Like 20 years ago, we could ask a question and it would remain unchanged. We know now that actually questions are completely dynamic. They change. So we know that actually the media coverage around OpenIDEO kind of changes the feel of what the question is. That's completely out of our control, which is fine. The terms and conditions, the evaluation criteria, the partners, but also the initial contributions to the site completely change the question. And one of the things we learned, actually, we designed early on, was we learned that we could feature inspiration to help direct the community. So when we see something we love, we feature it. Otherwise, actually, people get anchored by the most recent contribution. So the first thing to do is really understand the question you're asking. The next thing we always ask ourselves is actually who's well equipped to answer it. You know, if I've got one set of questions, I might choose to, and it's a chemistry-based question, OpenIDEO wouldn't necessarily be the right community. If I've got a question that requires deep knowledge or alternatively requires people with a specific skill set in a specific part of the world, you need to make sure they're in your community. So ask yourself who can answer your big question, and then go to where they are. Our community managers, we have Mina Kadri, who's here today, spend a lot of time helping bring new community into challenges to make sure the quality stays high. It's really important to us. And our community has grown. We're up to just under 16,000 users from 178 countries. I actually said in a presentation about 2 weeks ago that it was from 200 countries and there are only 195. So I'm slightly embarrassed about that still, but Google Analytics presents it as countries and territories, so that was awful. But yeah, we have 178 countries. There's 195. We're continuously looking for more coverage because we value diversity. That's important to us. And we see that affect the contributions. I was inspired by this on our recent Australian Queensland Food Challenge. This guy that you see up here, Ayan Tupan, photographed with us at an event in London not so long ago. He's one of the biggest sort of contributors. And he was contributing builds around surf culture, and he lives in Latvia. So inspiring that you give people access they never had before. Historically, the access was you just had to go to a good design school, etc. Now we all have access. We can all self-actualize. So the next question is, how are you going to motivate people? Money's fine. Like, I have no, I'm probably not personally excited by crowdsourcing using financial rewards so much because I think it makes so many other motivations you see up here difficult. You can see the motivations here. So money is the ultimate extrinsic motivator. It often collapses a lot of the other stuff. I get more excited about all of these. So when we designed Open IDEO, we made it more community-based solution rather than a market-based solution, which you can imagine. So actually, people contribute, I think, to Open IDEO for knowledge. They contribute for recognition. You can see the design quotient. This is my one here, where actually we tell people about their participation in the site and they can choose to reveal it or not. We find virtually everyone reveals it, which I think is insightful. It's interesting. We can learn from that. But the other thing that we learn is people start to import these into the real world. We see job applications with DQ. We see blogs with people's DQ. It's so inspiring to see it just spill out, and we encourage it. We actually give a embed code so people can do that themselves. The next question you guys need to ask if you're interested in open innovation is, what's the process you're going to run? And the more complex the process, the more careful you have to be. So this is kind of a representation of IDEO's process. We set a challenge. We look for inspiration, we synthesize it, we then come up with ideas, we prototype it, often in a sort of feedback loop here, and then we evaluate and launch. Not all of those are really well suited to sort of having everyone participate initially. So we focused on inspiration, concepting, and evaluation. Stuff that the crowd are well suited to help with, that they can feel like they're adding real value with. And you can see the other question, of course, is, do you want your system to be open or closed? We've already talked about that. So when you look at Open IDEO, you understand why we have inspiration, concepting, and evaluation, effectively, applause here. It makes sense. You can see the logic behind that decision. We also value collaboration. I talked about that earlier. We have diverse people working together, so we want them to collaborate, and we build these network maps to show people what it means. But you have to design for collaboration. You can't just wait for it to happen. Crowdfunding systems, tough to foster collaboration. That's not a bad thing, but you just have to be mindful of it. So we deliberately designed for different units of engagement around collaboration. Applauding something or commenting on something takes hardly any time. It's kind of our acquisition into the site. And then deeper relationships around building on or new content and celebrating collaboration here. All really important ways to drive collaboration. And this is a good example, actually, just to show you. So this guy lives in Washington, a guy called Sina Mosaeb. He's one of our lead users. He always contributes amazing stuff. This was actually on the food production challenge, so the Queensland challenge again. He contributed the idea of an iPhone app to help connect and inform. To give you an idea around the sort of collaboration, so this was his work you see here. This is his iPhone app. He's designed it to a pretty good level of granularity. It's lovely to see. And you can also see down on the right here, built on this. So these are all other concepts where people have taken his and migrated them into their own content. You can see how our network diagrams form now. And then finally, you can see the other type of collaboration, which is commenting. And it's pretty unbelievable, the richness of people's contributions. We actually learnt a huge amount from it. Initially, we didn't really kind of celebrate comments. We didn't expect it to evolve, but we reacted pretty quickly. And we even now allow things like applauding comments because we saw people having conversation threads in the comments, a behavior we didn't expect. And then final 4, just to share, maintain a drumbeat if you're going to grow a community. Don't think, there's no free lunch. A lot of people turn to this stuff because they think it's cheap or it's easy. It's hard work. Just catch up with our community manager, Mina, who lives in New Zealand, works a lot of time just making sure there's a drumbeat if you want to learn more about that. It's incredibly difficult. To give you an idea, this is an Open IDEO. You can see actually Mina tweeted, I just grabbed this not so long ago. That's English time, as I haven't changed it. But you can see just tweeting a huge amount to keep the buzz going. See, and actually, making sure that people continue to stay interested with what's happening. Also, if you guys are using open systems, collaboration, remember there is a whole world outside the platform and celebrate it. If you think that you're going to control a community, your history. They'll reject it. So we celebrate all of the interesting emergent stuff we see, and most of it we have no control over. So one example would be Yammer groups. So these are pretty heavy users that have celebrated their own conversation groups that we kind of participate in, but we had nothing to do with. Another I find inspiring, which makes sense given there's no online or offline really anymore, it's all blended, is people actually meet on Twitter, fans of Open IDEO, and actually go to restaurants and meet. They have what they call tweet-ups. They've had them in New York, Washington, San Francisco, people that have never met together but knew they had a common interest in social good through this platform. Again, we choose not to go. The traditional approach is to grab hold of it and do sound bites with everyone, video it. We choose not to go because we want these emergent things to flourish. And then the final couple is actually celebrate the journey as well as the destination. So a lot of, for example, crowdsourcing sites, you just celebrate the thing that pops out the other end. Think about the journey and what it means. Think about the engagement it has the potential to create. We regularly post blogs where we celebrate just the small steps. It can be incredibly impactful. And finally, final 2, most importantly, show impact. Like our community is uniting around wanting positive impact, so we have to show it where we can. We have a team in Ghana at the moment actually prototyping in Accra the solution of a toilet that was actually developed on the site. We'll celebrate that almost more than getting a new challenge. It's unbelievably important. And we've been celebrating impact actually over the last 48 hours in workshops to refine a lot of the concepts from the Queensland Challenge. It's so exciting to see, kind of in this case, local farmers, politicians, entrepreneurs, students get together around a common aim and build out these ideas and turn them into quick, actionable steps rather than just theorizing and trying to change the world all at once from the macro level. And the final one I wanted to share is kind of a heartwarming story for me. It was and also a great learning story. So if you have worked in traditional website type businesses, you're taught to hate lurkers. So a lurker is someone that basically just sort of watches from the sidelines of the site, doesn't want to commit, probably isn't actually, traditionally you would say that interested in the site. One thing happened at the end of last year that completely changed my perspective of whether lurkers are important. And it was a Christmas card we got from a lady called Bernadette Kwam in Malaysia. I looked at her profile. She'd never contributed to the site. She'd registered, but she'd not even applauded something. I would have said, lurker, not interested. How do we convert her? And she sent this hand-drawn Christmas card. And the effort she put into this told me that she was actually engaged in the topic and reminded me that actually the lurkers sometimes have a lot of the power and actually kind of take a lot of the value in a positive way. So those are the questions I ask. You can see them here. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tweet out this list in a couple of hours. So if any of you want to grab them just as an image, just to save you frantically writing them all down. But you can see there's some systematic order, and it's interesting how little technology features in it. Technology is an enabler. The real question is, what do you want to achieve, and who's able of achieving it? So thank you very much. These are my details. Thank you.
Fantastic. Can I just ask one question?
Yeah, fire away.
Where does this leave the notion of intellectual property? The collaborative world of innovation is very different from the idea of the inventor, the idea and the profit that comes from the idea. This blows it away completely, doesn't it?
So I don't think it necessarily blows it away. I think it just redefines where value lives. I think we, through a lot of the last 100 years, have placed a lot of value in ideas. And one of the things that we've learned is actually ideas, given technology, are almost commoditized now. I've started a couple of businesses, and with both of them, people have consistently said to me afterwards, oh, I had that idea, I had that idea. Everyone has access to all ideas. And if you believe that's true, then you know the value is in execution. And if the value is in execution, I'm optimistic that it doesn't matter if some of the sort of traditional defense of intellectual property collapses away. And I think we see, particularly in the software industry, which is a leading indicator of this, open source being a fascinating example where the value is about creating ecosystems, and also Creative Commons as an example where you kind of see people learning, moving up Maslow's hierarchy in a positive way without collapsing the system.
Yeah.
So there's exceptions to the rules, but I think it's kind of a net positive that we move away from that defensive thinking.
Okay, I want to take some questions or comments from the floor because there must surely be some feedback. Do we have someone with a microphone at all, or will people just yell from... We do have microphones on the side. Someone want to raise their hand if they've got something to say or a question? Surely? Yeah, down the front here we have a gentleman, if someone can get a microphone to him. I was thinking the music industry is a classic industry, isn't it, that's moved from that old paradigm of the big organisation signing up the individual artist to now basically the artist establishing their own website, getting their music out there, having control really over their own destiny, and the audience and the participants being involved in that process.
It's an amazing example. Like, the music industry was productized, so the value was in the CD, but the smart companies have realized that actually you can't contain piracy, you have to work with it, so you look for adjacent values. A lot of the money's moved to live events, which you'd expect. A lot of the money's moved to systems like you have here, I think, X Factor, and you also have... Do you have Australian Idol or something similar? So if you think about that model, they've taken the most expensive bit of the music industry, which was artist and repertoire, like searching for talent, and they've totally democratized it. They've even gone further. They get all of us to pay by voting to say what we want to buy. So they've turned a cost to a revenue. Extraordinary model. So we see... I find it inspiring, the music industry, actually, and I think publishing will follow many of the things we've seen in terms of the evolution. So anyway, I'm excited to.
Tom, you pointed out how you actually benefit by tying all the ends together to finally get a result. That's the way I read your message. People come up with the idea, then you share it right through to a product or success, whichever way you like to believe it. So I want to ask this question. To the Hawke government many years ago, I put up an idea that there ought to be a Department of Ideas as part of the federal government. Now, the purpose of it was it would register all the ideas, doesn't matter whether it's an invention or whatever, which is along the lines of what you're saying. And the idea being that the person would get the recognition of having it in the register, and if ultimately others want to take it up, they're able to link up with that person. And if it ultimately is developed, well, then there's a protection there. And this is where the government came in, that the government would give protection. So you could see that whether it's an invention or some other way, so people get rewards in different ways. Some people might make money, but the ideas could be better government. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be, an invention. But the registration of the idea leads to recognition. And that means that there's a good chance the idea can be adopted because others will build on it as exactly as what you said there. and ultimately the success will come from the adoption of the idea, whether it's an invention or whatever. What's your comment?
It sounds like you are way ahead of us in terms of the philosophy. I think I like two things in what you said. The first is, the traditional patent approach we just talked about is the idea that you can kind of ring-fence intellectual property, and a lot of the incentives are actually not to. You have what you call submarine patents, where people hide their ideas. It's unbelievable. They're hiding their ideas in case someone else uses it so that they can. It's kind of like piracy to me. It's just, it's shocking approach. So what I liked in your interpretation, your evolution of the idea of traditional patents is you did two things. You give some recognition without promising the world, because if you promise the world to inventors, nothing ever happens because they have overinflated ideas of how much an idea is worth. And secondly, what I loved about what you were saying, which still doesn't happen enough, is you create an open market where you're actually sharing ideas so they're accessible. Now, we don't have enough of that either. Like, if you look at the patent offices globally, I'm sure you've looked at patents in the past, they're unbelievably sort of long, complex things. It's an inaccessible system to date. So I think if we all kind of shared more ideas and were open about more ideas, similar to what you see in open source now with software, the world would be a better place. So I kind of applaud you for thinking about it before I certainly did.
Ahead of the curve. Well done.
Yeah.
And up the back, I can see one hand, and up. So on both sides there, we'll take the person on my right first and then on the left afterwards.
Hello. I was just interested about how you've set this up as an online forum, obviously. But they say, well, people say that there's a loss of conversation and the art of conversation. I was just wondering if you see a social loss to these conversations being made online.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I don't think they're better or worse. I just think they're different, and I think we have to accept it. We're actually, I think our ability to converse has been constrained by technology because technology hasn't really understood it or been adapted fully to it, but I think we see that changing. So a couple of stories just to bring that to life. I met someone at AT&T not so long ago whose daughter was a 12-year-old in the States, and he said her phone bill over a month, was 1 minute of voice calls and 6,000 text messages. So we just have to accept that people using these technologies are finding new ways to communicate. People did it with the telegraph. We found ways of actually shortening speech so that the telegraph was a useful tool. The same's happening with the internet. It's different, not necessarily better or worse. And I kind of celebrate that. The thing that scares me is how many clients I meet who stop their staff using Facebook, using Twitter, using basically all the tools that enable you to build these muscles to operate in this new economy. So I don't necessarily think it's better or worse. I just think it's perhaps an evolution of conversation. And I'm excited by new technology actually facilitating it in exciting new ways. Like video Skype is an unbelievable enabler of the sort of beneficial eye contact that you're perhaps sort of inferring to. So it's exciting to watch it evolve. Lots of sort of potential for it to improve further.
Okay, the gentleman up the back.
Talking about the evaluation phase, in the phases that you had up on the presentation before, what is your feeling with regard to whether it should be a democratic evaluation phase or not? Like whether you should be recognising that somebody with a deep strength in a field or somebody who is a newcomer, an amateur in the field, should have the same amount of say when it comes to evaluating ideas?
It's an absolutely cracking question. We wrestled with this loads. And the answer, I think, is it depends entirely on the question that you've asked. So if you're asking people to evaluate a polymer's ability to stay solid at 15,000 Kelvin, I think I probably wouldn't use the wisdom of the crowd. Whereas, if you can, and I think actually there's more potential to use the wisdom of the crowd if you smartly shape the evaluation criteria. So one of the things we learned early on is that actually people have a disproportionate bias to beautifully presented stuff. It's kind of a risk in the system. So you could have a good idea badly presented, a bad idea beautifully presented, and people have a natural sort of cognitive bias to the latter. So one of the things we've tried to do is enable fully free-form evaluation questions so that we can help shape people's thinking. So it'd be great if you actually participated on the site when we switch to evaluation, which will happen very shortly in a couple of weeks for the Queensland Challenge. And you'll see that we list out a series. Firstly, we don't ask everyone to evaluate everything. We're reducing the number to evaluate because it would just be too much work. And then we're asking people to evaluate against specific criteria that we've thought quite long and hard about, just to make sure that we're kind of judging for the right reasons rather than, you know, the aesthetics or the stuff that might matter less. Does that answer your question?
Okay, we're going up and down the stairs.
Sorry. You're doing it deliberately.
So is OpenIDEO an open platform? Like if we have a website that we actually want to generate ideas from and have collaborators, we could obviously set up our own system. But if we want to hook into your user base, is there any facility for that? Do you have an open API, or is there any method of actually linking into what you've got?
Yeah, API is basically the ability to plug other sites into OpenIDEO, so it enables you to smooth transitions between the two, but actually it means a heap of different stuff, and we're developing versions of it. So we're starting initially, the kind of low-hanging fruit for us is to enable people to pull a feed of all of the data that comes from OpenIDEO so they can be creative about it. We see some lovely data visualizations or early interpretations of this. The next level of complexity I think you're referring to is actually when we sort of deep root an API where, for example, people could, you know, drop their own challenge into OpenIDEO. I'm excited about that, the potential of that. We just have a kind of duty to our community to be very careful about how we do it. So what you will see is that as we move to explore new APIs, we'll do it in a really sensitive way and we'll make sure we learn as quickly as we can. But I find it quite hard to imagine a system where we enable everyone to throw anything at the community because they just get overwhelmed. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
And I think the woman next... Okay, thanks.
Hello, are you the next Mark Zuckerberg or are you a demon?
It's definitely not. He's far cleverer than me.
Well, I'm just saying, I think there's an amazing potential to shape and create, and I was just blown away by just some of the demonstrations that you had on the Queensland situation about food. And I just think that it's incredible if you can, why I use the word the Zuckerberg thing, is if you grow from small to very huge to take this concept to the world, then that's fascinating power in and of itself.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a slight difference is I'm excited about these systems in which the power doesn't reside with any individual, whereas I think Facebook's an incredibly smart system. They probably exercise a huge degree of control. So we probably would define what we're doing more as about sort of defining the playing field. And we enable the community not just to sort of self-select their roles on the team, but also at times to sort of change the rules of the game. So we probably don't exercise the level of control. I think they're very different, and I actually think they're both net positives. And we don't know where it go. I hope we go a little way to the direction you're describing.
We've got maybe time for one or two more, I'd say, in the middle.
Thank you for your presentation today, Tom. I'm just interested in the political fallout, or the sense that if we keep going to crowdsourcing and the notion of a political position, are we heading to a future where, rather than the old paradigm of the radicals and the conservatives, we're going to have whatever a particular group of people have decided this is the way we do it now, because this is what the community wants, rather than the politicians having a sense of this is what I stand for and this is where I'm going?
I think it's it's basically a great question. I wrestle with this, and I don't think, again, there's a right or wrong answer. It's particularly prevalent in the media industry, and actually it overlaps with politics enormously because of the power of media in politics. And I think actually we're kind of at the moment at an inflection point which is quite healthy, where we have a bit of both. The question is, I think opinions or ideas, so to reframe that, content like news, I think, is completely commoditized. The value is in curation, is in the way you present ideas. It's actually the way you package the ideas, and it's the way you execute the ideas. If you believe fundamentally that's the case, which I do, which is why I kind of applaud the Huffington Post, I applaud the New York Times, I applaud all of it. I think I applaud politicians. I'm excited about the transparency that this has the potential to create, and the fact that actually it kind of brings everyone to a critical mass of knowledge, potentially, whereby people are judged better, and potentially the world is more meritocratic. So I see some scary scenarios where you get kind of radicalism fostered online. We've seen potentially elements of that with Al-Qaeda, where people can sort of self-select themselves into groups and they never see anything else. But I think it's kind of happened through human history. Through human history, we've been constrained by the Dunbar number, which is the people in a social network who we can remember effectively, which is like 120 or 150 people. If you were born into a radical group at that time, like the certain religious groups that we've seen in the States, all around the world, where they bring kids up through that, and it's the same experience. So I think a lot of the challenges and the threats of people behaving immorally or behaving sort of, for non-altruistic reasons exist in both systems. And I think it's kind of all of our jobs, now we have greater access, to make sure we keep those in check as best we can.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap this because we're right on the knocker, and I know there's plenty more questions, but will you please join me in giving a hand to Tom Hulme? Thanks, mate. That's great.